Task Force Nova Hammer. Most of the guards I knew were just dying to see them in action. I was the odd one out in that regard. Well, they were here now, and those guards were too dead to see them. I'm sorry, that's a really distasteful joke. I guess Adrian's presence has rubbed off on me just a tiny bit. Speaking of Adrian, he was feverishly fumbling around in his pockets whilst keeping his eyes glued on the monitor. After a few moments, he tossed a bag of white powder on the table. "Astro Coke?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nah, just the regular stuff. The show's not at its climax yet. Gotta pace myself." He snorted the whole mound in about half a minute. "Yo!" he grunted, wiping his nose off. "You fellas want to hear a secret?" I don't think we had a choice. "Task Force, Void Nova, whatever. How do you think the members get recruited?" I shrugged. Dunno, some kind of test, I guess. "Nah, they're Voids as well." My mouth dropped. As he went on to explain, TF VNH was a constantly rotating team comprised of Voids, save for a few exceptions, who were a reasonable balance of both powerful and sane. In fact, different countries occasionally lent their own Voids to one another to use for their respective forces. In exchange for their service, the members would be allowed to live freely amongst society, although they were monitored heavily whilst doing so. "You sure know a lot of confidential stuff," Sandu said to Adrian. "Just who the hell are you?" Adrian sat back in his seat. Nobody. Just a dabbler. A jack of all trades, master of a good handful." Sure was insufferable. In any case, I put my sights back on the monitor, as Bella struggled against the seemingly insurmountable foe. She tried blasting him with the blade spray. Before she couldn't even raise her hand, it was broken with a single firm grasp.
What?
She spat, the life draining from her breath with every word. As Adrian would go on to tell us, this particular TF VNH member was Kente, the Guillotine Sanders. 6'6", 287 pounds. Supposedly, he was a real hard-ass. An abnormally powerful man with an incredibly skewed and strict sense of justice. To him, the word nuance meant nothing. Rehabilitation was a joke. Second chances were an alien concept. He was a man whose worldview was utterly black and white. To him, the laws that landed himself in prison didn't constitute legitimate justice. His ideas were the only ones that mattered. Cross his sensibilities, and you were a criminal in desperate need of execution. He's got a pretty notorious reputation in these parts. He's captured at least 7 of the Voids here himself, nearly killed all of them as well. Honestly, I'm not rooting for him to win. Gonna be too hard to wrangle in afterwards. Just as Bella looked about ready to pass out, Kente was blindsided by a sudden rush from Luz. Well, I guess blindsided wasn't the right term. Kente blocked his strike with relative ease. "There's revenge customer numero uno," Adrian said. "The big guy wiped out Luz's entire village before dragging him back to this place. No wonder he's pissed." For the first time, Luz had a fierce expression on his face. He let out a rage-laden shriek before digging both of his hands into the only exposed part of Kente's body, his neck, lighting up the area, and his face with sparks. "Oh boy, that ain't gonna work," Adrian muttered, grinning. Kente grunted, seemingly taking the full brunt of the excessive shock without going down, before grabbing both of Luz's arms and slamming him into the floor. He dropped Bella in the process, who immediately ran off with her life. Adrian clicked his tongue in disdain. "She's not even helping him out. Guess that's women for you." Sandu and I just kind of glanced at each other awkwardly following the comment. Unfortunately, Luz's rage just wasn't enough for him to fulfill his revenge. While still on the ground, Kente stomped on his head, crushing it like a watermelon. Quite a gruesome sight to behold. Afterwards, he set his sights on Wu, who'd been observing the whole exchange. "Finally," Adrian said. "The strong are going at it." For a moment, Wu and Kente both seemed to acknowledge each other's power, hesitating for just a moment. And then, in a flash, they rushed each other simultaneously. Both of their opening moves were kicks, catching each other's respective legs mid-air, causing the walkway beneath them to crack underneath their combined pressure. On top of possessing overwhelming strength, they were both apparently skilled in martial arts as well. A terrifying combination. But Wu possessed another more devastating aspect on top of all of it. Actual weapons. Wu dropped his leg, opting to blast Kente with a flurry of shotgun rounds instead. It was enough to send him flying backwards, breaking apart the torso section of his suit. And he didn't give him a second to breathe. Wu rushed forward immediately after, grabbing Kente's helmet and slamming it down on his knee, shattering it completely. He attempted to decapitate him on the spot with a saw, but Kente caught the slash before it could land. He looked at Wu, his dark eyes twisted with rage. He broke the saw in half before delivering a powerful-looking right cross to Wu's stomach that splintered a portion of his suit and sent him crashing into the rails. He managed to crack the damn thing, I thought, astonished at the fact. That meant, at a minimum, Kente's punches packed more stopping power than an M203 grenade. Oh, he's getting serious. You know what they call his striking technique? What? The pulverizing fist. He twists his knuckles at the last moment, grinding flesh to a pulp. With his strength, it's like drilling through wet toilet paper. But that's only for regular people. Doesn't work on big boys like Wu. The armor covering Kente's knuckles had shattered upon impact. He winced in pain as he cocked it back, preparing to deliver another strike.
You're an impediment to justice,
he said through gritted teeth.
Prepare to be executed.
But before the two could clash again, 5 more figures jumped down from the hole that Satanbot had created, landing in succession around Kente. Looks like the whole gang's arrived. He began giving us a rundown on the other members of Kente's squad. First off, there was Ken, the fugitive Ryo, 6'2", 165 pounds, a Korean-American from Brooklyn. Not a super malicious guy, he kinda just did whatever the hell he wanted. Problem is, a lot of those things happen to be illegal, and unethical. Let's be honest. He was nonchalantly chewing on tobacco as he leaned on the rails. His ability was rather interesting. Even Adrian had a hard time explaining it. Physically speaking, Ken was more or less average. However, he had the ability to summon portals, from which obscure-looking but terribly powerful entities would emerge and tear apart his opponents. But at the end of the day, all that he really wanted to do was escape. He hated being monitored. Next, there was Nassar the Bloody Twister El Rafir, 5'9", 168 pounds. He was a loan from the Saudi Arabian government. He possessed the ability to transform into a whirlwind comprised of glass-like material, moving at speeds upwards of 120 miles per hour, along with being able to blast out deadly streams of shards at multiple targets at once. It was quite the gruesome way to go out. He was also a really weird guy. While nearly every other void assigned to TF VNH had relatively clear ambitions, his were an absolute mystery. But he probably wasn't up to anything good. His eyes were darting wildly around whilst a gigantic mischievous-looking grin was plastered across his face. Next up, there was Callista, the beautiful demon tailor, 5'11", 121 pounds. She was a former fashion model based in Australia. Her career ended at the ripe age of 23 when she ended up suddenly murdering 4 of her fellow models, along with the police force sent to detain her. Supposedly, her abilities had been latent from birth, gradually building up to a point where she was unable to keep it in any longer. In her demon mode, her mouth would fall abnormally agape, dark rings would form around her pupils, and her body would be engulfed in cold grey flames. At that point, she'd become intangible like a ghost and drift into her victims' bodies, causing them to bleed profusely from every orifice. But that only worked on humans. For most voids, she'd have to resort to physical brawling, using her razor-like fingers. Her ambitions were fairly explicit. She just wanted to kill everybody, void or not. It begged the question as to why they'd even assign her to the force to begin with, given the fact she was so damn volatile. Whatever, I guess I'll never understand these people. She was staring intently at Nassar, but without any real emotion behind her gaze. Kind of just looked like she wanted to kill him for the sake of it. Continuing on, there was Clint, the normal guy, Rockwell. 6'1", 180 pounds. Like Nassar, he was also a mystery. Supposedly, he'd never been a void at all. No otherworldly powers/abilities, just a regular, albeit capable guy. Adrian didn't know much about him, only that he was a special case granted access to confidential information and a spot on the TF VNH due to a recommendation from an unnamed higher-up. In order to compensate for his lack of physical abilities, he was granted an oversized power suit dubbed the Behemoth, along with the God-slaying cannon, a heavy-duty automatic rifle that fired explosive rounds at 600 RPM. He stood still with a rather determined expression on his face, as if he had set his mind on a singular concrete objective. Rounding out the bunch was the de facto leader of the force, Jack the All-American Barnes, 6 foot, 200 pounds. Like Clint, he wasn't a void either. Born in Oklahoma and belonging to a prolific family, he was an exhaustively skilled soldier turned government agent that managed to work his way up to the top with the help of some nepotism. Eventually he was chosen as the inaugural subject of a project dubbed the Paragon Trials, in which government scientists would attempt to genetically engineer superhumans. Well, he wasn't actually the first, but that's what he was told, for peace of mind. In any case, his trials ended up working out in the end. I guess the 8th time was really the charm. As a result, he was basically Superman, save for the flight. Genetic engineering hasn't gone that far yet. Man, look at those blonde curls. How the fuck does he get his hair like that? He had an arrogant grin on his face as he strolled to the front of the pack. It only took me 5 seconds of looking at him to reach the conclusion that he was probably a giant asshole.
What's the rush, Kente? Let's not get too excited here. Remember who's giving the orders, yeah? Your arbitrary orders mean nothing to me.
Kente responded, still staring vehemently at Woo.
The only thing I care about is justice.
I could see a large vein bulge out of Jack's forehead from the opposition.
Okay.
He muttered, before seemingly composing himself.
Let's finish the task at hand.
He directed his gaze towards Woo.
Come on, big guy. You lost your chance at a fair fight when you decided to become a robot psycho.
While Wu may have been a match for Kente by himself, taking on the entirety of TF VNH at once was a rather tall order. I guess he knew this himself as he jumped over the rails, landing on the lower floor.
I'm going after him,
Jack said, stepping forward.
The rest of you take out the riffraff. They want the voids alive, but I'm going to be sorely disappointed if you don't bring me back some fucking mincemeat.
That was one thing him and Kente could agree on.
And remember,
he said, turning back. His expression was suddenly teeming with fury.
You're all scumfuck piece of shit voids as well. You try to escape, try to fuck with me, and you're all gonna be begging me to end your fucking pathetic lives.
He pointed at Ken.
You stay here. Make sure nobody tries escaping through the roof.
Instead of acknowledging the order, Ken just spat his tobacco into a plastic bottle.
Hey, you listen to me, you fucking Jap? Remember, we beat you in the fucking war. Isn't he Korean?
Ken just raised an eyebrow at the remark.
Dude, I don't even know how to respond to that. Like, whatever, just fucking listen to me, alright?
Jack screamed. Ken grinned sarcastically and made a defensive gesture.
Okay, boss.
Jack's forehead vein bulged out even more. It was really starting to look pretty gross.
Alright, let's fucking go then!
After finishing his motivational speech, he jumped down, presumably going after Wu. Save for Ken, the rest of the TF VNH followed suit, scattering throughout the chasm in search of the remaining voids. The strong were finally about to converge on one bloody path. As dark, weird, and gruesome as the whole situation was, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit excited to see what was about to transpire. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you're an animal lover like me, please consider donating to the World Land Trust, a charity that aims to help wildlife through buying land, preventing development, and helping endangered species.